Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Ray, and welcome to the RayWenderlich.com podcast. In this podcast, we'll keep you up to date with the latest app development tech talk. Now, here are your hosts, Dru Freeman and Susannah Skyer-Gupta.
Thanks, Ray. This is the RayWenderlich.com podcast. Welcome to episode 9 for season 12. This episode was recorded on Tuesday, the 22nd of February, 2022. For those following, that's 2/22/2022, and it's Tuesday. This episode is for release on the 9th of March, 2022. The episode is sponsored by towering tech titans, cute cartoon butterflies, and the intoxicating promise of a single code base across all platforms. I'm your host, Dru Freeman, along always with my co-host, Susannah Skyer-Gupta.
Thanks, Dru. This episode, we welcome back Brian Kayfitz. Brian has worked on video games, e-commerce, productivity, finance, and travel apps. He became an independent contractor just before the start of the pandemic, and we'll be talking about that. And here at RayWenderlich.com, he is an expert on all things Flutter and is the outgoing lead, recently led our Flutter team.
Brian, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, guys. Good to be here.
This is a great way to rehash and catch up because of the way the technology moves. We did this about 2 years ago with Alex as the co-host, but let's take a look now because in 2 years, Flutter has changed just a little bit.
Just a bit, yes.
So before we jump onto the technology, we always ask this thing, pandemic-wise, is everything going okay with you and yours?
Yeah, well, I know you said it was 2 years ago, but it felt like yesterday that we were just talking. That's the Groundhog Day like time loop that we seem to be stuck in. Nothing's changed at all.
It really does. The pandemic was just hitting during that season, and now we're hopefully heading out of it. But some things are returning to normal. Some things, meh.
Yeah.
Brian, you're in Toronto?
Yes, I'm just north of Toronto in King City, Canada.
So how does
it's a
it
lovely
feel
area
there in terms of the pandemic? I mean, does it feel like it's over, or what does feel different, if anything?
So kind of, I guess it depends if you ask. So my family, we've been very COVID conscious, probably more so than any of outside our standard social cycles. So within our house, everything is still like super clean and taken care of. Like we haven't been to a grocery store in 2 years. We still order everything online. Like we've digified everything. Our life is pure digital at this point. If we go, if you don't have an e-commerce platform, we're probably not going to patronize at this point. Now, outside our house, people are getting a little bit more relaxed, probably more than I would feel comfortable with, because I have a toddler that I'm taking care of, and he's not vaccinated. So
and can't be, yeah.
No,
he's
only
too little to get a jab. So
yes,
they're still working on those approvals.
Yeah.
Well, the dosing is so delicate there.
Yeah. My hope is that by the time that it gets around to his age group being allowed, it won't be required anymore. It's like it'll just kind of, it does feel like we're winding down. Fingers crossed things go back to normal in the summer. We've signed him up for soccer in the summer, so they better stop the pandemic.
Okay, wait, he's how old?
He's 2 in a month, precisely.
Okay, and he'll be playing soccer?
Oh, he'll be on the field.
That's going to be so cute. That is going to be definitely adorable.
I suppose I should say, since you're up in Toronto and this is the 22nd, happy belated Family Day.
Thank you. Yes, and to you as well. And you had President's Day this week.
We had President's Day.
Yeah. Try to keep up with my American holidays. It's challenging.
I keep up with my Canadian with my girlfriend. She's always reminding me when she's got days off because of her kids.
Mm.
Okay, so yesterday was Family Day?
Yes.
Okay.
Which is basically just a businesses shut down day.
Yeah, basically. It's a more recent holiday that we just decided, we don't have a stat holiday in February, so let's make up one. and Family Day was created.
It's a
That
nice
makes
idea
sense.
too.
Yeah, just
Yeah, long weekends are nice.
it makes honestly more sense than Victoria Day. I don't think anyone really cares that much about Queen Victoria anymore. So it's been a couple hundred years. So yeah.
Very true. All right, let us wind over into technology. And while we will talk about a lot of the changes, let's go back and at least rehash some of the basics of trying to explain to newer listeners or people who haven't necessarily caught the old episodes, how do we explain what Flutter is?
Sure. So Flutter is a multi-platform UI framework. So it is used to create iOS apps, Android apps, and now you can use it to create web apps, desktop apps for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. And it keeps spreading out further and further. So it is kind of trying to fulfill the promise of one code base that can go everywhere. And it actually does a remarkably good job at that. It's definitely not the first technology that's tried to solve this problem, but I think it's probably the most successful technology to solve this problem.
When you look at, do you have some statistics on where it's being most used? Like, are there more Android apps that are really made in Flutter or iOS or web? Like, how does that break down?
I wouldn't be privy to those exact numbers because it's an open source technology, so pretty much anyone can go and create. I know Google likes to publish how many Flutter apps are on the Google Play Store. They probably don't have that information on the Apple side. I'm pretty sure Apple wouldn't want to share that. So there's over 100,000 Flutter apps on Google Play at this point. I can go look up the actual number. Yeah, it's grown up incredibly fast. Recently, Flutter actually surpassed React Native in terms of stars on GitHub, which is great. So the web is getting more stable. They announced stable Windows support around last week or 2 weeks ago. And stable by Flutter standards is usually like really, really stable. They're very cautious about what they call stable, unlike Swift UI, where it's like, oh, it's stable, but it's still not really.
Yeah, but don't really use it in something that's production. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So no, go ahead.
No, I finished my thought. Sorry.
So now Flutter is open source, but it's open source by way of Google's creation. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it started inside Google actually as a fork of Chrome, interestingly enough, where the developers of Chrome basically thought, how can we make the web like really, really, really fast if we don't worry about backwards compatibility and get rid of JavaScript? And that's kind of how Flutter started. So a lot of the brains at the root of Flutter is the same as Chrome. So they both use the Skia rendering engine, which is a wrapper on top of OpenGL / Vulkan / Metal, like all the GPU type painting. And then on top of Skia, then it ports to Dart, which is the programming language that is used to communicate to Flutter. And from there, you build your apps. But it runs almost like a game engine. So you could say that Flutter and Unity kind of have a lot in common because they both are really just everything is rendered by the GPU as opposed to the CPU, which is why it's so amazingly fast.
Okay, that's interesting. So Flutter and Unity, when are you not using Flutter and you should be using Unity instead?
If you want to do anything in 3D, you should be using Unity. And also, if you want to make a game, you should be using Unity.
Okay, interesting. So you wouldn't advocate making games in Flutter. That's just not, I mean, other than like it might be fun to play with as like a learning project.
Well, you can make games in Flutter for sure. There is actually a lightweight engine called Flame, which recently got to 1.0, which tries to build on top of the core Flutter engine to build their own game engine. And it's definitely very interesting for 2D casual games, but in terms of the ecosystem, in terms of support, and definitely if you want to do anything more advanced, there's no catching up to Unity or Unreal. So probably that would be the better choice in terms of if you want to make a very serious game. For casual games, Flutter can work very well. I've actually made a couple games in Flutter just for fun. So it does work. But yeah, you're not going to make Fortnite in Flutter.
I always find a good example game is Game of Life.
Yes.
I mean, it's nice, it's simple, it's grid based, so there's some sense of drawing, but there's also more computational quote business logic involved to make that one come to life. And it's a really great test of pretty much any language to see how well that'll come up.
Mm-hmm. You definitely can do Game of Life in Flutter if you wanted to do that.
Why does this sound like you've come in contact with it already?
Well, now I'm thinking of maybe it sounds like a challenge.
See, now here's the next tutorial we want for the Ray side, just Game of Life in Flutter.
Mm-hmm.
We'll leave that in the show notes and then turn it into a link as soon as we can.
We did have a couple games already on Flutter in the tutorial site. So we did Minesweeper, we did Snake, but they're still, they're very primitive or kind of casual games, I would say, not your AAA high production value games.
I mean, a good demo site is only going to give you the framework for a game. It's not necessarily going to evolve that thing out to something that's really broadcast ready.
Yes, of course.
Well, and also there can be a lot of like really fun games to make, to play, to learn from developing, to learn from playing that don't have to be like immersive 3D. Look at the terrain change. Wow. That's like, oh, the contouring's amazing. Like there's a lot of cool things you can do without that level of engine.
For sure.
That kind of engine.
Yeah. So. And even from like an educational perspective, even when working with some of my students and mentees, sometimes making games is a great way to start programming. Not only because it's fun, but also because it's hard. Like it's probably creating a responsive 60 frames per second game, even the simplest type of game, is going to be a much more challenging mental experiment than a CRUD app.
So, game logic and state machines are very, very different from just your typical network call for an API in JSON. It's very different.
Yes.
So refresh our minds. What was it that got you hooked onto Flutter in the first place?
So that's a long and sordid story.
That's all right. We've got time.
So I started actually off as a game developer before becoming a mobile developer. So was doing a lot of work on the PlayStation 3, Xbox, and then moving to discovering Unity and saying like, okay, well, it's hard enough to make a game once. I don't really want to have to rewrite this game 7 times to get everywhere. So Unity was a fantastic solution at the time. And eventually when moving away from the game industry for various reasons and into the app market, it became strange. Like, why do I have to write this twice now for iOS and Android? I know I can have the game industry has solved this problem. Why hasn't the app industry solved this problem? And you were presented with technologies like Apache Cordova or Xamarin or Kony, and there's a whole line of multi-platform technologies, most of them trying to use web technology to solve the problem. And it just didn't work. It worked close enough, but compared to what you can create with Objective-C and then Swift, you have this beautiful performant 60 frames per second app, or you have something where you're struggling to do basic navigation. And when phones were less powerful, it was very, very noticeable, the difference between hybrid apps and mobile apps. So it was always kind of pushing against these technologies, but still curious about them. And eventually Flutter came along and kind of was very similar, but says, we're going to try multi-platform, but we're not using JavaScript. We're going to use a compiled, type-safe, object-oriented language, which is Dart. And if you were to look at Dart side by side with Swift and Kotlin, you would probably be hard-pressed to tell the difference. Like, they're basically equivalent feature-wise. I like to affectionately call Dart the most boring programming language I've ever encountered, because I was able to understand it immediately by just looking at the code after working in Swift for 5 years. So that was the developers of Dart have taken that language evolution very seriously, and they don't want to be the first to any language feature, but they want to try developing it the best, and they'll take bits and pieces. And sometimes it's interesting what they purposely choose not to include. So like, and where they want to focus. So it's a very, very conservative, but also very easy to understand language.
Can you give me an example of something that Dart didn't pick up?
Reflection was actually removed from Dart. So it did kind of exist at the beginning, and then there was a library called Dart Mirrors, which is basically not really used anymore. So at this point, there isn't any active reflection framework in Dart. People have tried to solve this problem with using compile time reflection. So you do like code generation. You can add some annotations on top of your functions like you would in Java, but you actually have to run a preprocessor to annotate those, to turn those annotations into generate code. So when you're actually running the app, there's no reflection. It's just running off generated files, which I'm ambivalent about. I'm not convinced this is the greatest idea, but
one of the things that you'd said when you were on before that was simpler in Dart, I'm wondering, is this still the case? Is Dart is single threaded, that you don't have any management of threads? Is that still true today?
Yeah, so there is kind of yes, kind of no. So for the most part, Dart has a system called isolates, which is their kind of solution for threads. So isolates are almost like a mini process in a sense. So you have your application run in its own main isolate, which has an event loop, kind of similar to the way JavaScript works, where you throw messages and events into the loop, and it will just get to them one after the other. And if you wanted to, you can spawn child isolates that can run separately and have their own event loop that doesn't share memory with the parent isolate. So you would have to do work in your other isolate and then copy any data over back to the parent if you wish to do multi-threading. And it is something that you can do. Sometimes it's advantageous. Most of the time it's unnecessary. The main Dart engine is so performant, it's rare to actually run into situations where you need to use isolates. And sometimes you might find that the copying of data is actually more expensive than just running it in the main isolate. So even network calls you can actually just do. So you would call to the standard HTTP library that would return a future, which is kind of the equivalent of a JavaScript promise. Right. I think futures are in Swift now. To the best of my knowledge, I know they have async.
There's async await.
Yes, you guys finally got that.
Yeah, be nice.
Remember, we all play nice in this world here.
I know.
Right.
No, I was waiting with bated breath for async await to come to Swift, because it's been a life changer to finally remove the callback hell that you can get stuck in with that.
So you also do Swift development?
Not so much anymore. I used to do a lot of Swift development, and then slowly Flutter has been taken over to the point where I'm basically full-time Flutter at this point.
Yeah, I was really curious about this. As these 2 years have gone by, you had just started your independent contracting fortuitously prior to your last podcast interview. So in the, I guess it must have been winter or spring of 20. So do you think Is there money to be made as a Flutter developer? Is that for those people out there who are listening who are building skills as a dev, who are new to their careers, should they lean into Flutter? Are there jobs to be had?
For sure. Flutter is definitely exploding in terms of popularity. Flutter is probably a safer bet than React Native at this point, if you were to go down the multi-platform route. And for a lot of companies, and this is even on clients that I consult with, if you're starting with a greenfield project, I might not earn myself any friends with this comment, but I'd say Flutter should be your default choice at this point.
Oh, interesting.
You should choose it before you consider native, and only consider native if you have a really good reason. And if you need to do some very heavy integration with system hardware or something that's like really like tied to the platform. But if you're writing a CRUD app, if you're writing something that is basically can go anywhere, pick Flutter first, and then look into other technologies after the fact.
And I presume you're saying that based on expertise where you have clients who are having you do exactly that.
Yes, that is correct. And there's nothing stopping you from going down and writing native code if you need to. So there are cases in some of my client apps where I do need to put in a bit of Swift and a bit of Kotlin, and there are mechanisms called platform methods where you can bridge down to the native platform and do whatever you need, and then come back up to the Flutter layer. So you're not locked off by any stretch of the imagination from any technology, and you should probably always use the right tool for the right job. So you don't want to be this guy where if I only have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. That's not
right.
True. So maybe being a polyglot developer is sometimes the best way to go. So don't be like, maybe we might run into a problem where we need some Rust, and Rust might be the best tool for the problem. Like, all of these technologies exist for a reason. If otherwise there would be only one programming language, and there isn't. So
I think I'm smiling because I think polyglot development is a theme of this season also. We talked about that.
We had Alex back on, and
yeah,
Alex talked about being a polyglot himself. So let's break down Flutter and how it works. Is it its own UI in place of the native?
Yes. So Flutter takes over the rendering completely. Everything goes down to the Skia rendering engine, which then is wrapped on top of the GPU, and it just renders everything there and then comes back. So there is no communication at all with any of the platform UIs. So there are facsimiles of what in Flutter they call them the Cupertino widgets, but I don't think Apple ever gave them an official design name. And then you also have material widgets for the Android side, and now you have Fluent widgets for the Windows side. But these are all recreations. So people at Google have very carefully studied how Apple has composed their UI, and very carefully studied how material is composed, and create Flutter equivalents that are more or less pixel perfect, as close as possible. I'd be hard pressed to compare the two. There might be a little difference, but if you're not a developer, which is most users, you probably won't be able to tell.
Is that one of those things where if, say, Windows does a Windows 15, Windows 16, where they change the UX, or Apple pulls another iOS 7 and changes the UX, there may be a noticeable difference between a Flutter compiled app and a native compiled app?
Sure. Yeah, because it's tied to those libraries.
Right.
Which may be a good thing or a bad thing. I remember when the great move away from skeuomorphism, where you had components that suddenly didn't look right, and everyone was scrambling to update their app. So with Flutter, you'll never have that problem because you're in full control of everything. So you can choose when you want to migrate your style. And even then, I've been kind of talking with clients on how you probably actually want to push your own identity more than the identity of the platform. because that is actually like, if you're just working so hard to create an app that looks like a Cupertino app, an Apple app, why not just have Apple make it? They push on their design identity, and Google's pushed it on their design identity. You should create your own.
I always refer to it as the Adobe syndrome, which is Photoshop looks like Photoshop no matter what platform you run it on.
Exactly.
Though I will say that it still carries sort of that native smell, if that's I can take a look at Photoshop on one platform or the other, and I can say, yeah, well, this is that platform's Photoshop. But I guess that gets away from the idea with Flutter that you could really focus in on, this is what the UX vocabulary of my world is.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. There are some things that you kind of want to be universal, like maybe scroll would be the best example. So like iOS has that bouncy scroll when you get to the edges, and Android has that glow that when you get to the top and bottom, and Flutter will actually handle that for you transparently, regardless of whether you use the Cupertino widgets or the Material widgets. You'll just get that effect that'll be platform aware. And if you wanted to, you can create a whole slew of platform aware wrappers, which is something I've done on some of my apps, where they're just, so I may have what I call a platform button, and then I'll say, am I on Android? Okay, return the Material button. If I'm on iOS, return the Cupertino button, and no one will be the wiser. So you can use object-oriented strategies to encapsulate these design languages if you wish. But Flutter's not going to make that decision for you. That's you as a developer needs to make those decisions.
So climbing into Flutter from a new developer's point of view, and let's not worry about the whole unlearn your native or learn this. Where is the general knowledge progression? Do you start with sort of the Dart language business logic and then move into the UX, or what is the general path of learning Flutter?
So this is a challenging question.
Well, thank you. That's what I'm here for.
The answer is it depends. Everyone is a different type of learner. I don't think there's a one way to do it. It's who you are as a developer. So for me, I would like to learn the language first, but that's my personal strategy. I can't say that translates to another developer. So Flutter or Dart has a simple, like, quick summary of the Dart language. You can read it in like an hour, maybe less, and you'll know Dart by the end of that document, because it is such an easy language to pick up. Or if you're a more visual person and you want to jump straight into composing widgets, just go ahead. Dart pretty much stays out of the way for the most part. So if you've ever if you have any Java knowledge, any Swift knowledge, even JavaScript knowledge, you can just start writing code. You shouldn't stumble over the language. And then so Flutter also has a feature called Hot Reload, which is basically a game changer from my perspective, where anytime you save code while writing, that code will automatically be injected into the simulator or the device, and you'll at the position that you're at in the app. There's no restarting the app. There's no changing everything. So you can feel free to experiment. There's no having to stop and recompile. Once your app is live, there's a JIT running between the server and between your computer and the simulator. And so if you're, like, for example, let's say you're working on an interface and you're like, I wonder what it would look like in cornflower blue.
Right.
So then just change it and hit save, and boom, your buttons are now blue.
So it's like Swift UI previews, only you don't have to keep reloading it, and it stays working.
Yes, okay. It's Swift UI previews, but better. And you've gotten that from on mobile. You don't get it on web at this point. So web, you still have to restart the application when you make changes, but they'll get there with web. It's that platform probably has the biggest hill to climb in terms of parity to the native version.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I mean, like in your example, for web, you just use the dev tools in the browser to like change design things and say, oh, it looks like this,
Yes, if you're using the DOM, you can definitely do that. But Flutter continues with they want to basically recreate their own canvas, so the DOM isn't used when you use Flutter Web. Everything's in a canvas, so it sometimes feels like Flash is back. But,
oh, interesting.
Sorry, I just had a shudder from Flash.
Flash used to be amazing in the 90s.
I know. I was like, what? Flash is cool. All those little mini games loading.
Okay, so we talked about Dart getting out of your way because it's a very simple language. Frameworks are where all of the studying comes from. We can talk about Swift or Kotlin or Dart, and that's really a minimal amount of learning. What really comes in is where you start saying, I want to put together a table. At least this is me coming from the Swift side. I want to put together some complicated UX form, etc. And I want to touch networking. And talk to me a little bit about these frameworks.
Sure. So Flutter is structured actually very similar to Jetpack Compose and Swift UI. So it's a declarative framework. So and you will actually, the code will look very similar, where you have a function that returns a widget, which is, I guess, the Flutter equivalent of a view, though it's actually a little bit simpler than a view. And you have to then just return basically a tree of widgets that will compose your UI. So for an example of a table view, if you say like your table, for example, you can return a list view builder, and then that list view builder will have within it a closure that says, okay, so I'm on item for index X of your list, what do you want to render? So then you will keep calling this closure over and over again until you can return anything you want for that index. And then Flutter will just take care of the scrolling and all the complicated parts for you.
So are we saying that we're going to basically want to be more MVVM for Flutter?
That's another discussion.
I don't mean to be having you get onto one end of all of the holy wars that may be building up over do this, do that, do this, don't. It's not about the code.
Yes. So
sometimes it is, guys.
Yeah. So design architecture is something that is also very interesting, especially in the Flutter world, where it seems like every 5 minutes a new state management package gets invented. So my personal favorite structure is called Block, which stands for Business Logic Object Components. This was something that Google originally created for the Angular world, and then they took this philosophy to other platforms. And it's kind of similar to reactive programming, where you would be listening to a stream of data, and then whenever you get a new event into that stream, you then respond accordingly. And Flutter actually has this built-in widget called a stream builder, where you can just attach a stream, and then every time a new event gets kicked off, you can then return a series of widgets that then respond to that data. So it's there's this formula that they like to show on the Flutter site, which is UI is a function of state, which is probably the same as Swift UI, I think, at this point, where you have your data and then you create your UI in response to your data, not like the UI kit way, where you set up your structure and then constantly have to refresh your UI. And widgets are super cheap, so you can just create them and destroy them with impunity. You don't have to worry about performance. Let Flutter worry about performance, at least for the most part. That sentence comes with asterisks. So but there's plenty of other strategies that people have come up with. If you want to do Redux within Flutter, you can. There are packages to support this. There's a billion state management / dependency injection packages that you can choose, whatever your state managed package du jour is. And Provider is one of the most popular ones right now, where you create these types of widgets that don't render anything; they just store data, and then whenever the data changes, those widgets can then send messages down to their children, because everything in Flutter is a tree, and then the child widgets that are listening to those provider widgets can then redraw automatically. And you can get very complicated very fast with this, because you constantly have to think about your tree algorithm in your head. I usually advise against that. I'm kind of keep your code boring, keep it simple. If you don't need MVVM, don't use it. If you don't need provider, don't use it. Like, these tools are here to solve problems, but sometimes they create more complexity than needed. And there's nothing wrong with doing the most basic thing first, and then refactoring towards a more complex architecture later on.
I appreciate you calling out the KISS design algorithm.
Yes.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Readily understandable by newbies.
Readily understandable by newbies, by oldies, and by you when you go back to your own code 12 months later and go, what was I thinking?
What was I thinking?
Yes. I always
remember to document.
Yes. I love the joke that programming is like a murder mystery where you're both the detective and the killer.
I hadn't heard that one before, and I really should have. That's beautiful.
I can't take credit for it.
Let's back out of the Flutter depths for a moment and talk about the tools for Flutter. What is the preferred tool of Flutter right now over the IDE, etc.?
Whatever you want.
What do you use? What's the most fun and easy way?
Not Xcode.
Yeah, not Xcode. You can use Vim if you wanted to. I would be impressed if you just. I know actually a couple Flutter devs who have set up Vim, but the three primary IDEs that are recommended by Google are Android Studio / IntelliJ, so the same thing, and Visual Studio Code. So I lean more towards the IntelliJ side for my preferences, but that's just because I was doing Android development and I have all the keyboard shortcuts memorized, and I just don't feel like rewriting that muscle memory. So and I'm okay with my Mac overheating for something, because it's Canada. I'll take the hit.
You mean you don't have an M1 yet?
I do have an M1, actually.
And it's overheating from a...
Sometimes, actually. IntelliJ is a beast. Or maybe some plugin that I installed is not optimized for the M1, but that can happen.
That probably can happen. If it's not optimized, it's running through the emulating. I forget what it's called, but it's
Rosetta.
The Rosetta.
Yeah,
and that probably is causing it to burn a bit.
Yeah. So actually, IntelliJ is a little bit ahead of the game in terms of M1 compatibility than Android Studio, just because Android Studio they have to get a copy of IntelliJ and then add their layers on top of it and repackage it. So if you're an M1 user, probably use IntelliJ first and don't worry about Android Studio, even though Android Studio is required to get the Android SDK to build on Android. So you'll just have both on your computer. And if you want to use Visual Studio because you don't want your computer to light on fire, that's an option too. It's what works best for you, because Flutter runs as a service in the background and it's compatible with all these IDEs. It will come to where you want it to be. There might even be someone working on an Eclipse plugin, maybe. I don't know.
So basically, at core, a text editor and a couple of command lines.
Sure. Yeah, you could do that if you want. But there's such great autocomplete support. I would say stick with one of the IDEs to take advantage of what the Dart Analyzer and Dart Service can do. And sometimes even like going back to native, like I miss how good the Dart Analyzer is. Like there's this feature to automatically format your code just built in to Dart. So every time I hit save, everything snaps into place. It ends the great bracket war because everything's formatted, and it cleans up your imports automatically, where if you were to go to Java or to Swift, suddenly like, why are all my extra spaces there? How come I have to manually delete spaces again? Because I'd have to install SwiftLint or whatever to get that to do its thing. But so Dart and Flutter are very much batteries included in terms of developer experience.
Okay. Well, that stunned both of us right there. We both were like, okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, I realized I lost you a bit.
No, that's fine. I mean,
I'm still back pondering, if you're using VI, if you're using Vim, how do you do the hot reload? But
just hit save, and the Dart analyzer will take over.
That is really impressive. Let's so the last time we talked the last time we talked, Flutter was relatively new.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about some of the new things that have been coming out from Flutter that really continue to grow the platform.
Sure. So the biggest change to Flutter, probably since we talked about last, was Flutter Web. So now you can basically build web apps with Flutter, and that is mind-blowing to me, because it is great to be able to actually be able to start as a mobile developer, and now you can push your product everywhere. And the web is the biggest platform in the world. You can't beat it. So if you can get your product onto the billions of eyes waiting on the web, that's fantastic. I would say from a technical perspective, the web still has the highest hill to climb. So it doesn't, like as I was joking earlier, it feels a bit like Flash. That's still kind of true. But so scroll is a little bit off. Things just don't feel perfect compared to if you were creating a classical web app with like React or Vue, but it will get there. If there is a team that will crack it, it is the Flutter team, because they are geniuses. And maybe if we talk in another 2 years, then I'll say Flutter Web's perfect and fantastic, and go make your production apps. Today, I would say experiment with it, take a look. But it might be for specific things. Like if you want to actually make like an internal, let's say an internal employee management system that's kind of not really for public people, just for some people at your company, or things that are not like
customer facing,
not so much customer facing, and not so heavy on documents. So if you want to make an app, so something like Figma or a BI tool, then Flutter's great. For some reason, it fails at blogs, which you would think should be the other way around, because blogs are simpler. But
right.
It's just Flutter works very well right now on the apps, not so much on websites. But again, it will get there. So probably in about a year's time or roughly, my answer will be different.
Okay, so
I bet you'll come back.
Yes, we're immediately planning on having you in 2 seasons.
2 seasons, yes. 2 seasons, episode 9.
Well, I think it's been 1 episode progress. I think the last one was 8. This is 9. Let's do episode 10. So we've got the web is coming, and it's getting much better. Is there anything else that you want to talk about that are new features that are like?
Either in Flutter or Dart, like what are you looking forward to? And also I'd like to know, like, what do you think is going to be announced at Google I/O?
I'll just pull up my crystal ball.
Yes, please.
So one of the most exciting changes that I found in the last 2 years was actually Dart transition to null safety. So when we first started, it was not a null safe language. It was closer to Java, where any variable could potentially be null at any point, and the language wasn't going to help you, and you have to do like if null,
right,
everywhere. That's no longer the case, because now the type system has nullability put in the same way as Swift and Kotlin. So you have like int and then int question mark, and then you can then like it looks identical to Swift, so it and behaves pretty much in the exact same way. So that has been a life changer for me because I hated writing if null. So I'm very happy that that's happened. Dart is also finally improving their enum support, which is like yes.
Yeah, you spoke of that the last time as how it was not fully featured the same way it is in Swift.
Yeah, originally Dart enums were basically just masks on top of integers like C, so you couldn't do anything with them. They're now starting to add a bit more built-in functionality, and this is in the language pipeline right now. It's not available yet, but you will probably be able to write functions onto enums soon. So though it'll get there. I'm excited about that. But today, actually, there's static extensions that you can write, kind of so you can extend an enum to add functionality to it. So it kind of works the same way. It just feels a little bit more hacky, but you can do it. And then they are looking into metaprogramming as the big feature that's coming up in the next couple of months. So
what does that mean?
It's kind of like reflection. So they took out reflection, and now they're looking to add it back because now they're ready. And metaprogramming may turn into a whole bunch of things. So like people are looking to use it to create like record classes, like you can do in Kotlin and Java, where you just define your fields and you get all your getters and setters and comparators automatically without having to create them. So that's one thing that metaprogramming will solve. And it might also get away from all the code gen that people are creating these days to kind of solve reflection. So I'm curious to see what's going to come out of that one. In terms of actual Flutter support, I'm kind of happy where it is right now. I just hope it just keeps getting better, gets more performant. Like they recently, in the latest version of Flutter, they added a feature on the iOS side to exploit this kind of not so commonly used feature of Metal, where you can just refresh a section of the screen as opposed to the entire screen. So it's one of those like wonderful features where you get a gigantic performance hit for free. Like you just update the latest version of Flutter and suddenly your apps are 27% faster.
That's very cool.
It's a present. So I love it. So I hope they continue with that. I hope web gets more stable. In terms of the Google I/O question, the one thing that I guess is on the tip of most Flutter developers' tongue is what's Fuchsia?
Okay, that was going to be later in my questioning here, because so 2 years ago it's like the open secret of Fuchsia. So I was looking that up. So it's an operating system.
Mm-hmm.
What more do we know? It's super pretty color. Why do we care about this, and where are we going to be interacting with it? Do we know the answers to that?
No.
Okay. Do we even know, like, I don't think Google I/O for this year is announced. Like I couldn't find a website. Do we know, is Google I/O in person? Where is Google I/O?
My guess is that Google I/O is going to virtualize again. If they do it this year, they may stagger and do it every other year. I haven't heard anything on Google I/O yet. And usually it may still be a little early, sometimes March.
For May though, right?
Yeah.
Brian, did you want to opine on this?
I don't have an answer on that.
None of us work for Google in that specific department.
Yeah. Flutter tends to have their own events that are actually separate from Google I/O that they run. Like they have Flutter Engage that they've done, and they have these like detailed Flutter dev days. And for me as a Flutter developer, I'm actually usually more excited about those conferences than because Google I/O actually usually just presents a summary of what was already presented on the dedicated Flutter days.
Okay. So what's on your radar as coming up that's exciting in the Flutter world, like big conference? Is there a Flutter Dev Day coming up, or?
Nothing that's been announced yet,
Okay.
but probably what's going to be coming up will be stable desktop support for Mac and Linux. So they just did a dev day for Windows, and they've already announced that it's in their plan to do the other two platforms. So that will be probably a surprise to no one that comes out, but that's something that will likely come. One thing I might like to see maybe is some more accessibility on the low level stuff of Flutter. So being able to write custom shaders would be very fascinating, and probably just push what you can do with Flutter just to the stratosphere. Because Flutter wraps Skia, so you can definitely do, like, Skia can do incredible work, but a lot of the custom shader stuff has not been exposed to Flutter.
Interesting.
So you are locked off from that aspect of the framework, and it would be great to be able to kind of write your own Skia shaders to do crazy stuff. And that would be very cool to see what you can do.
So now you've slightly ruined my usual question, which is to put on my Santa Claus beard and ask, what would you like to see that's not there? You said that you'd like to see the web evolve a bit. You said that you're looking forward to potentially the Linux and the Mac platforms. Is there anything else that, you did say it's like, well, I'm really happy where it is. It's like that there's no desire for something that's missing or that you'd like?
I think to keep with the kind of the philosophy of kind of Dart being a conservative language, I kind of like the frameworks to some point kind of know their place, to see if, I don't, as maybe potentially crude of a comment as that may seem, when you try to solve every problem in the world, you become like a jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah.
And Flutter does a really good job at what it does today. So it is probably the framework for creating UIs right now. I wouldn't even consider using anything else at this point.
Wow. Okay.
But if they were to add, let's say, AR support to that, now you're adding one more piece to the puzzle that then kind of displaces everything. So we're putting so much focus on AR, we might lose our ground with UI. And now you have to balance those two. So knowing all of these different frameworks, like, it's great to say, okay, this is a problem for Flutter, this is a problem for Unity, this is a problem for Swift, this is a problem for Python, and let each kind of tool be the best at what it can do. And don't try to have one tool that does everything.
That's a really great opinion to hear. I have always appreciated right tool for right job.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think
honest, I'm sorry, I just wanted to finish the thought that I've always been one who's been sort of hairy-eyed over the concept of the holy grail of multi-platform.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But if Flutter does organize that concept of right tool, right job, and focus on what you're doing right, maybe it does become the unifying platform for certain types of apps.
It does, yes, for sure. And I had that exact same opinion. Like, even like 3 years ago or wherever it was, when I first heard of Flutter, my initial response was to roll my eyes and go, "Oh God, not another one." And I was shocked to actually see, no, this one's actually really good. Pay attention to this one. It's not just another one. And if you like, a UI is a UI kind of, not regardless of what screen you're on. If you're not, like, there's different form factor considerations between desktop and web and mobile, but for the most part, it's take something from an API and render it on the screen. That's probably 90% of the apps that I work on. And for those types of apps, that Flutter's perfect for that. there are exceptions, and for that there are other tools. I won't use Dart to train a machine learning algorithm. That's Python's wheelhouse. But to run a machine learning algorithm, sure, it could bridge to TensorFlow Lite, but that's something that's written in C. And then you have FFI, foreign function interfaces, to then bridge it to Dart. So you have to look at what is the problem I'm trying to solve and then choose the tool. Don't have the tool first and then shove tools everywhere. Even with so when clients come to me, it's like, oh, I need an app and I want to have an app on iOS and Android, because at this point in the market, it doesn't make sense to be on only one, because you're like, if you're only iOS, you're losing 70% of users, because Android is here. It's the most popular mobile operating system.
I'm abundantly aware of that. About to release an iOS app.
Yes. So if you have a brand new app and you're like me, you're one person, you don't have time to write the same app twice. You have to get it out. And even I've been maintaining my own personal app, Visited, which is a travel app, and it used to be an Objective-C app and a Java app. And then the Android side was even more complicated because it had to do OpenGL stuff, and I just got exhausted. I did not have time to maintain both of them. And you would get things where the iOS app was features ahead of the Android app, and then you have to spin back and do it again. And if you're just an independent or you don't have the largest budget in the world, I don't know if native makes sense anymore.
So did you go back then and take this personal app and rewrite it in Flutter?
Yes, I did.
What was that like?
It was sobering to look at code that I had written 8 years ago, and the kind of way that how you ever looked at your old code and like, who's the idiot that wrote this? Oh yeah, that was me.
I know them.
It seemed like a good idea at the time. That's the mantra.
Yeah. One thing that I was actually quite impressed with Flutter. So I have so my app has its own custom map where you kind of can keep track of all the countries that you've been in. You actually can click on a country and it will change color, and it's like a giant scratch map. Yeah, and it was it's a fun kind of little travel app, but to implement a custom map natively turned out to be like a massively difficult experiment in memory management, because how to just doing all these weird contortions to get UIKit to do what I want and not run out of memory at the same time. And so when I was converting this to Flutter, I had to, okay, this is going to take 3 weeks. We'll see if we can even do this. Hopefully, fingers crossed, I won't have any trouble creating the map. And I got the map layer done in 2 hours.
Oh my gosh.
And I was shocked, and I kind of was not prepared for it to be as easy. I was expecting to suffer during this module. So and I didn't even need to optimize it for the most part. So Skia is just that good at taking, it draws the whole world. So I have coordinates for every single country on the, it's 30 megabytes of coordinate data uncompressed that you can just throw at Skia, and it will just give you this infinitely scalable vector image that you can scroll around within at 60 frames a second on let's say an iPad Air 2. So it's not only a really easy framework to use, it's incredibly powerful. And the Google guys have taken a lot of energy to optimize it so you don't have to. It's kind of I like to talk to some people and say, I'm always shocked that the web works. I look at some of the JavaScript code out there, it's what? Oh my God. But it's that the fact that the web is as stable as it is credit to how great the browser developers are. Nicely said. And that's the same with Flutter. The people who create the Flutter engine, who create Skia, are at the top of their game there.
Now,
I have a follow-up to that.
Go ahead.
So for other folks who are other indies or anyone sitting out there with Swift or Objective-C code, Swift code that they want to turn into Dart and Flutter, are there automatic conversion tools?
No. you could maybe, but I would not advise that. So it depends on what you kind of want to accomplish. So you can embed Flutter into a native app if you wish. So you could have, let's say you're like a 90% native app, and then you get to one screen that's Flutter. So Flutter does have an add to app option. So it can operate as a Flutter view. So you just have one view that happens to be handled by Flutter, and everything else is UIKit. That option is there. And then also you can go the other direction. So you can embed UIKit views into Flutter if you needed to. So if you had a mostly Flutter app, but you had this one really advanced UI view that you've been maintaining for 7 years, and you just don't want to rewrite it because it's so good, you can embed it. And Flutter can take care of that. So the two can play nice if you want.
But if you've got an app that is in UIKit and Swift, and you want to have that app be on Android also, and you want to try Flutter, the right thing to do is to think about, like, okay, what am I doing in each view? What is this app actually doing?
Yeah.
How do I do this in Flutter and Dart?
Yeah, so that's going to be the challenge. If you want to leave Apple's playground, then you're going to have to step away from Swift. So Flutter can work on iOS and it can work on Android, but Swift cannot. So it is locked in. The Android version will have to be, unfortunately, bereft of Swift.
How is Flutter with third-party extensions, like third-party libraries that may have come from C or the like?
Yeah, good question.
So there is a feature in Flutter which came out, I think, last year, called FFI, or Foreign Function Interface, where you can basically bridge to C libraries in the same isolate. So you can actually have Dart just call it as is. So, for example, there is a persistence framework that I like to use on my project called Drift, which is a package that you can get off Flutter's dependency site. And they use FFI to talk directly to SQLite. So you have all of so in one really fast call, you can call Drift, which calls FFI, which calls SQLite, which then returns all of your data to be able to manipulate it. Where in a previous version, you would have to use what's called a platform channel. So you could have Flutter call the platform channel, which then goes over a bridge to your native code. And then your native code talks to those frameworks from that point, and then has to send it back to Dart. But now you don't have to do that anymore.
Nifty.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put you on the spot for a moment. The dyed-in-the-wool Kotlin developer, or more likely Swift developer. We talked about the right tool for the right job. And these are people who are considering, well, how do I know what is still platform? Can you talk about, from Kotlin and Swift point of view, what things they do right that right now Kotlin would not be the right choice for?
Flutter.
Flutter.
Dart.
Sorry. So what is one thing that you don't want to use Flutter for? Is that the question?
Right.
For each platform. Feel free to say nothing.
Probably. No, there are some things for sure. You can't really do 3D in Flutter. So if you want to have 3D models flying around or crazy 3D interfaces, that's not something that Flutter will do for you. You can probably do it in using SceneKit on the iOS side, and I don't know if there's equivalent on the Android side, or use a full game engine like Unity, as we brought up previously. So Flutter is very much strictly a 2D tool. even though it wraps the GPU.
How is it for, we deal with a lot of Android phones, a lot of iPhones. How is it for dealing with the concepts of the music playback or the video engine or the telephony, etc.?
Mm-hmm. So for those, that's actually usually handled by a package. So Flutter itself doesn't actually support audio or video or any of these. There are third-party packages like video players and audio players, which exploit the existing native frameworks that handle those already very well, and they just pipe those in. So like there's an audio player package where you can have a Dart interface that just calls AV audio player underneath the hood to actually play the audio, and then the equivalent on Android. And a lot of these problems have been already solved by the community. So you can just go to pub.dev if you need a piece of native functionality to include in your app. Someone probably already wrapped it. Probably a few people have already wrapped it. So now you have choice, and you have to go which audio player is the best one.
So I don't have to worry about things like photos or contacts or any of those things. No, I should just be able to access those through, because I know, at least from the Swift point of view, Apple continues to say, well, you need to give permissions to do this.
Yes, so that's still true because you are embedded on the Apple platform, so you still have to follow Apple's security rules. And I do find it beneficial for Flutter developers to be aware of the native platforms, because you will run into a point where you need to open up Xcode, you need to fiddle with your info.p list, you need to set up your provisioning profiles. That doesn't go away.
And same on Android with Game Store requiring app.
Play Store, yeah.
Play Store.
And Gradle and key stores and setting up your Android manifest. So sometimes if you are, like to bring back to Alex's point from earlier, if you are a polyglot, you're going to be flying, because if you already know those platforms, then you're going to have a much easier time when you do eventually run into those limits.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it's not really that halcyon promise of it just this one set of things a new developer needs to learn, and then she is completely proficient in the perfect system for creating user interfaces, because you do have to have some understanding of the device, the environment these are going to be running on.
Yeah, it's virtually impossible to be running on iOS and not run into code signing, and then have to sit into a lecture on code signing, going, why do I need to do all this? But this exists for any environment. There's quirks everywhere. So like it solves 80 to 90% of what you need to do. And for that last bit, you still have to respect the rules of the platform.
Are there Flutter guides for people who are, they started in Flutter and now they want to distribute on Android, iPhone, and basically the Flutter guide says, okay, here are the little things you need to do to take this Flutter app to that next level?
So there's a whole bunch of guides on flutter.dev. This content is also covered in our Flutter Apprentice book on greatwendellick.com on how to publish the app on iOS App Store and Store. Yes. So we do talk about that a lot, like even things like handling push notifications, for example. That's almost a pure native play. Because like Flutter will handle what's going on when your app is in the foreground and running, but push notifications are the opposite of that. So it's mostly still you got to create your certificates and upload it to Firebase or whoever you're using to handle the communication to APNS. All of these, like, there's still a lot to learn outside of what Flutter will offer. The ecosystem it definitely doesn't replace any of the ecosystem that you need to learn for native. It just will make your life easier instead of having to write the same app twice. So
I'm old. I'm an old fart. I say don't use push notifications. Use pull notifications.
They're less annoying, pull notifications.
Then they're a lot easier. Just go to the server, say, "Do I need any news? No, good, fine, whatever." Brian, let's take the hands off the keyboard for a moment.
Sure.
What do you do, assuming that outside is an option? What does Brian do just to like not do code? What kind of fun things are there?
And I do want to interject here, having just listened to part of your interview from 2 years ago. So Dru regularly asks this of guests on the podcast, what do you do when you're not at the computer? And you guys had just had a baby a couple months before, and you were like, nothing. So how does it feel now?
Have you gotten used to the child now?
Yeah, he's 2 now. He's walking and running and drawing.
Starting soccer this summer.
Yes. He's a very happy little guy.
That's
and
awesome.
Probably that's what takes up the rest of my time, if not more time than developing. So me and my wife kind of just tag team who's handling the child and who's working, because one of us has to work and one of us is on kid duty, and that's.
What do you folks like to do for vacation or getting away?
What's that?
Fair enough. That's a fair enough answer.
Yeah, I'll tell. Maybe in 2 years I'll answer that question.
Yeah, once a child is more self-sufficient, it makes it a lot easier to get away and do things. I remember traveling to Vancouver when my son was about a year and a half, and we were inexperienced parents, and we didn't even bring a stroller, and we wound up just going to a mall, buying a stroller, and walking around the mall, because that's about all we were equipped to do in Vancouver, which is a beautiful city.
Oh, I love Vancouver. It's one of the most beautiful cities in Canada.
I'm partial to Toronto.
Toronto's good too. We got some nice tall buildings. And
and I hear an amazing food culture there, just like so many different choices and types of food.
Oh, yeah, for sure. There's even though I've been born and raised in Ontario my entire life, Ontario can't hold a candle to Quebec in terms of food.
No, okay, I have to agree there. Having gone through even a small town in Quebec, you're just like blown away by some of that. Culturally, it's amazing.
Yeah, I'll let the Quebecois have that part. they can take the food award. They definitely win that. And their skiing is better. But that's a consequence of geography. Ontario is pretty flat, but.
So I had a kind of, I don't know if it's a return to the keyboard question, but I'm really curious as somebody who's worked on a lot of content production. So I thought it was a huge deal with the Flutter Apprentice that book that RayWenderlich.com partnered with Google to promote that book and to have, the video series, the tutorial video series for that. What was that like working together with Google? What was that experience like?
I can only say from the 10,000 foot view, because I actually wasn't on the Flutter Apprentice team, but to see that relationship work, it was inspiring. Like Google they're working really hard to promote Flutter. They have a fantastic public relations and developer relations team. I actually remember sending the initial email to Tim Sneef, the product owner of Flutter, talking about what we wanted to do at RayWenderlich.com, and they were incredibly receptive, and they were always watching our tutorials with bated breath, going, "These are going to be the guys to get it right, to actually be able to create amazing educational content for Flutter." And when the book came out, and they said, "If you guys do great content, we'll push it," and that's what they did. And I think Flutter Apprentice turned out to become one of the largest books that Ray Wenderlich has released because of that that publicity push, that Google did. So that's was amazing. We're hoping to do that again with some of our upcoming books. And that they're a fantastic partner to have. And it's a
It was
cyclical-
really, so if you were 10,000 feet, I think, I don't know, I'm 30,000, like kind of maybe can't even really see anything, but like watch some of those videos. And it's amazing to me how accessible, the people who made up Flutter were and are to the community. I mean, I'm really struck with, so I think something that is amazing about iOS dev is how welcoming the community is and supportive. I think Flutter maybe even seems more so. I mean,
Yes.
there are literal children who are, helping other people become Flutter developers. It's just like, it's open to everybody. And that's really cool.
I remember when starting on Flutter, I had this like deja vu moment where it's like, oh, this is what iOS used to feel like during the Objective-C days. And it was like very nostalgic, like everything's new, everyone was trying to do their best, they're all supportive. There was no like, this is the right way to write an iOS app.
Right.
So like the egos remain at the door, they're not welcome. Just everyone wants to support, and I hope it stays that way, because it's precious to kind of have, there's no such thing as the right answer. There's no, this is the authoritative architecture. It's do what you need to do and let's help each other and create amazing apps.
Yeah. I wonder, I mean, perhaps it is a function of how long something has been around, but it seems really beautiful and exciting right now. And that right there, I think, is a reason to learn Flutter, is to get involved with a very supportive, welcoming community.
Yes. I am moderately trepidatious that the pub.devs ecosystem might become the next NPM. I hope that doesn't NPM stands for Node Package Manager or JavaScript Package Manager. There's lots of infamous stories of lots of web applications being nothing but a string of packages put together. Like there's like a package called isEven, for example. Like,
got it.
Well, anybody can write a package, right? Maybe
yes.
That's just like, there's plenty of room in the market for your idea.
Yeah. The modulus operator apparently isn't built into the language, but but right now Google is trying to add a lot of like scores and ranks to packages, so you can see like this is a 90% package. Good. And they're really focusing on keeping the package ecosystem clean, which is challenging.
Right.
I'm not sure if you have that on like CocoaPods, for example, where anyone can put anything up. Well, you can put anything on pub, but you may not get a good score.
Yeah.
Swift Package Manager now, right? And yeah, I do think there's some kind of rating system to that.
Yeah.
And I know that like, which clearly is going to be different with Flutter. So internally here, like when we're making tutorials and creating apps, that go with the tutorial that show you what you get to learn and play with, we tell our authors, don't use anything external, right?
Yes.
So clearly you couldn't do that in Flutter because like all the, how do I show a video? How do I play a sound? You need to go to something external to do that. So.
Sure. But it depends on what the tutorial is trying to do. So when I was team lead, I was very strong on resisting packages as much as possible. So like if you were, and if you need to use a package, it should be relevant to what you're teaching. So like if we're to continue with the video example and you want to make a tutorial about how to play video, why is provider in this example? What does provider have to do with video? Provider's dependency management. So
right.
You can use packages where necessary, but it's too easy to fall into this trap where you just do nothing but packages. And if you've ever got into situations where you have version conflicts on packages,
yes,
and you need to update one package, but you can't because it's dependent on another secular dependency, but Flutter's been upgraded and you have to take that, but you're stuck because this package author has decide to go AWOL. So now you have to go to the forked version of that package that someone fixed, and it's just
a mess.
Yeah. So I still say avoid packages where you can. Bringing them in, the ones that are kind of useful, but if you don't need it, don't use it. So hopefully no one ever publishes is even to pop.dev.
All right. Brian, is there anything else that you can think of that you'd like to add in that we've missed?
Not immediately. That's pretty exhaustive.
We try to do a good and complete job. All right. Brian, I really, really want to thank you for coming back to the show and giving us another lowdown into Flutter. Once again, it's a technology that I'm going to walk away from the episode going, I really need to pick this one up in my copious lack of any time. But I really appreciate you coming back on the show. Thank you so much, Brian.
Yeah, send me a ping and I'd be happy to walk you through it. If you want.
Well, I've got my iOS app that I'm releasing to the public in about 25 days, 16 hours, 14 minutes. I've got a countdown on my desktop, and it's a 7-year iOS development. So I find myself wondering, is that my best route rather than paying somebody to do the port?
Or doing the port yourself, because clearly that's the tutorial project you're supposed to be doing in Flutter.
Yeah.
Well, it's always great to learn different frameworks, even if they're not your home. Like, you can learn new patterns, new ideas from seeing how different people approach the same problem. And sometimes it's actually fascinating to see, like learning Flutter has given me a new appreciation for some of the solutions that web developers have come up with, which I never had before. So it's good to leave your box every now and then, just to see, just to get new ideas and engage in different discourses. Otherwise, they'll just keep repeating the same idea, and you won't be. And you want to keep learning, because if you're not learning, you're dying.
Oh, that's the way to end that one right there.
Yeah, exactly. That will be the last part of the show.
Statement. Thank you once again, Brian, for making it onto the show. We're going to definitely have you back in a few seasons.
Super nice to meet you. Thank you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Coming up next episode in about 2 weeks, Renan Diaz will be joining us to talk about his upcoming book, Real World iOS by Tutorial. After that, it is time getting toward the end of the season to put the co-host and the host on the hot seat. Susannah will offer us a behind-the-scenes look at the iOS tutorial development process here at raywenderlich.com. So that's going to be in 4 weeks. In the meantime, for Susannah, who I could not do this season without, and for Brian, thank you for being on the show. I am Dru Freeman. You can find Brian on Twitter at BKayfitz. That's BKayfitz. Susannah, you can find at Suzgupta, Suzgupta. I am Podcast Dru, DRU. We'll see you all again on our next episode in 2 weeks. In the meantime, back to the Emerald Castle. Ray, back to you.
And that's a wrap. Thanks again, everybody, for listening to the raywenderlich.com podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to leave a rating on iTunes. See you next time.